Hi, I'm Autumn,
And I'm Laura,
and together we're
the
the Boo
Boo
Sisters.
Sisters. Welcome to Boo Sisters, episode number 4 of
Yeah,
season 2.
episode 4. We haven't, I was gonna say we haven't seen you in 2 weeks, but we don't see anyone ever. Uh,
You haven't heard from us in 2 weeks, unless you have split the episodes up yourself.
right, that's what I was meant to say.
Well, you almost got there.
Yeah, pretty close.
So I came across something in my meanderings around the internet, Autumn, that I kind of thought was funny and along the lines of what we talk about. And so I wanted to A, get your opinion of it, but B, ask if you've ever seen anything like this in your internet meanderings.
Okay.
So, what I came across were essentially Facebook marketplace listings for items that may or may not be linked to the paranormal.
What? Okay.
So, on one of them was, and this is from listed in St. Paul, Minnesota, it simply says Ouija board free with no other description, but the photos are of the Ouija board, which is like this wooden board. Everyone knows what a Ouija board is, but it's wooden, sitting outside, like on the sidewalk pavement of somebody's house, and it's on fire.
What?
I'm not joking you.
So, like, they're selling a burnt Ouija board that's probably cursed with demons.
Well, yeah, like why, first of all, why did you take the picture of it being lit on fire? Even if you think it's cursed, why would you list it that way, right? And then the other picture is a picture of the board looking a little bit burnt, and it's sitting in front of a cardboard sign that somebody's written in marker, free Ouija board, no returns, please.
Oh my gosh. This is why I don't play with Ouija boards. Everyone has their own thing. Ouija boards is my line. That is something I don't cross that line.
I think it's a good line because I don't necessarily think it is a direct line of communication with the spirits that you want to talk to, even if it does work. It would be like using a walkie talkie, and anybody on any channel can communicate with you, right? So you're inviting in whatever's out there listening.
Right. Yeah, whoever wants to. Which in the 90s, I feel like we tried to do that, Laura. We sat with our walkie-talkie, like,
We
who can
did.
we find on our walkie-talkies? Just some random strangers. It's super dangerous, kids. Don't do that.
Well, at that point in time, walkie talkies were limited too. So I
Right.
think ours were for either 2 miles or 5 miles away from us. So it was anybody within that distance, which is even scarier if you think about it, that you're only reaching people basically in your backyard.
Right, exactly. Creepy looking back
So
on it.
do you think that that's a gimmick that somebody did that and put it out there, or that they were truthfully trying to get rid of a Ouija board?
I think they're for real. I think you should message them and
Why? I
just say
don't want
something.
it.
No, say something like, "What condition is the Ouija board in?"
It looks a little singed.
And just see what they say. Because I'm super curious. Maybe you would get the full story from them. And then you can be like, on second thought, I don't need a burnt up Ouija board. But can you tell me the story behind that, please?
Yeah, maybe they would tell me. I mean, it looks legitimately like it could be hand carved, not your standard buy it in a grocery store or somewhere else Ouija board.
That's even more interesting.
So there was one other one I came across. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Now that I've warmed you up a little bit to what's going on here.
Yeah.
This one is a listing from Merrill, Wisconsin, and it's for $5 a piece or $30 for all. And it's a picture of probably 30 crosses of various sizes and shapes and different arrangements, all decor pieces that you would maybe hang on your wall or sit on your dresser or something if you were religious, or
That
potentially if you were warding off evil things.
or vampires.
So the listing description now says Bought too many, $5 a piece or $30 for all. They are all saged and from an old lady estate, not creepy, lol.
I like how they put that in there. Not creepy.
I know,
LOL.
which
Winky face. Just kidding.
doesn't that make it worse? Don't you think, like, oh, they're for sure telling the truth? They're definitely not lying.
But when you first read it, my first thought was, oh, someone had them left over or got them at an estate sale. Because I have seen in my estate sale shopping days collections of crosses like what you just described. So it makes sense, I think, to me that that's where it would have come from.
So it could be legitimate.
I think so. But
I
I
feel
think they
like,
probably think they are creepy and they just put that in as like, not creepy. La la
yeah,
la.
the variation of crosses, like maybe we should post these.
We could do that and put it on our episode page just so people can see the photos of the
Yeah,
Ouija board on fire and the cross collection.
and have their own opinion. So, listeners, tell us what you think. Are these something that you would definitely pick up as a gift for somebody, a friend who's into the paranormal, or you'd stay away from, or you'd try to burn and destroy like somebody else did? Do you think that they're tied somehow to something paranormal? Because they're definitely creepy, in my opinion, if nothing else. Have you
I'm
ever
gonna,
seen,
I,
Autumn, anything
yeah,
like that? Like when you're looking around Facebook Marketplace or Mercari or anywhere?
no, I've never, but now as we're talking, I'm literally going on Marketplace and searching. There are Ouija boards on mine, but they all look not on fire. 10 bucks,
They
25 bucks. The
all look
25 buck
pretty not
one
on
comes
fire.
with a Celtic dagger.
Ooh, that's actually kind of cool.
$15, $10. They do not say that they're haunted. This one says new, never been used.
Do you believe that that's the truth?
It looks pretty new. But the hand carving thing, like these are all obviously like boards, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
cardboard boards. Oh, except for this one. This one, okay, this one looks like an actual wooden board. Like the letters look kind of burnt into wood.
Mm-hmm.
Um, trying to see if there's a year on the back of this box because it looks really old. But the description says some funny, funny stuff started happening after I messed with it. Need to get rid of it.
Yeah, I would believe it. I think more people have experiences than
With,
and try to get rid of it than you think.
ugh, I just don't dabble in that. I'd be interested to hear stories though of people that have, because that just interests me a lot.
So today is a free choice day.
Yeah, and I will just give you a heads up that mine is a little dark.
Oh, I thought you were going to say long because you always tell me you have mine is so long. I'm like, longer than last time?
It just keeps getting longer every
8
time.
pages. What?
No, it's only 6 pages of notes, so it is not my
Oh,
longest. It's dark though.
are you going first today or am I?
It's your turn.
Oh, okay. Well, then the darkness will have to wait. Dun dun dun. Okay, are you ready then?
Yes, I am ready to listen.
All right. My haunt is LaLaurie Mansion in New Orleans, Louisiana. Have you heard of that one?
No, I was I was pausing because it sounded slightly familiar, but I don't think I have.
Okay, cool. I was curious if you had, because in my research of it, there were people, I read this discussion, and people were like, everybody in the United States has heard of this place. It's like one of the most haunted places. And I was thinking, I haven't heard of it, and I really like ghost stuff. So,
Okay, I'm excited.
in the heart of New Orleans is a residence steeped in 200 years of grim history, a residence that is to this day supposedly cursed. Upon arriving at the LaLaurie Mansion, you would not think it was cursed. Its federal style architecture with a Baroque facade and wrought iron balconies represents the kind of stately grandeur you'd come to expect from New Orleans. You'd walk through arched doorways to see spacious rooms with high ceilings and ceiling medallions, a courtyard with Greek columns. It was originally built in 1832 by Marie Delphine McCarthy Blanc LaLaurie. They really like names there, I've come to understand.
That
And
last name is so familiar to me. I feel like I've heard it, but keep going.
maybe you have heard of this place. So
Possibly.
her name is a mouthful, partly because of how many times she was previously married. First, in the year 1800, to a Spanish officer with whom she had one child before his mysterious death, then to a man of means, a banker, and a bunch of other titles he had, who was from New Orleans, with whom she had 4 more children before his passing, and finally, marriage number 3, to Leonard Louis Nicholas LaLaurie, a physician who she met when he was treating one of her daughters who suffered from spinal deformities and illness.
Okay, sounds a little fishy.
It will get more fishy because he was actually 20 years younger than she was.
Oh.
And some say that she sort of tried to entrap him because she got pregnant and he was kind of in over his head, and he went back to France and wasn't told about her pregnancy until his brother, who is still in New Orleans, wrote him and said, "You got this lady pregnant. You need to get back here and marry her."
Oh gosh, okay.
So his brother had to plead with him to come back and take the responsibility that was his.
Was it really?
I
Was
think
it
so. As far as the notes of history go, I mean, I
Okay,
wasn't there.
but she like entraps him because she gets pregnant on purpose.
There are a lot of stories in this about
Yeah.
her character that I'll just say right now. Nobody knows 100% what the truth was of her character.
Mm-hmm.
But the rendition that most people believe is that she somehow entrapped him with by getting pregnant in order to be with him and be married again to
Okay.
somebody who also had a good standing in society, was financially stable, he was a doctor, all of that.
Got okay.
But as we know, even in modern circumstances, a rushed marriage due to pregnancy is not always one of love and happiness. It is during the early years of this difficult marriage in 1831 that Delphine purchased the property that would become LaLaurie Mansion. From the moment they arrived, neighbors would overhear loud arguments, and so it was to no one's surprise when Leonard LaLaurie packed up his bags and moved out in 1834. This loss of yet another husband and source of support and income supposedly drove Delphine mad. Not good. So, rumors had already been spreading that she was brutalizing and even torturing her slaves before this point. These rumors were fueled by an incident in 1833 when a young slave named Leah fell to her death in the courtyard. After a council held an investigation of Madame LaLaurie, her slaves were set free. But during this time, when her husband left, she ended up purchasing them all back one by one, casting worry throughout the neighborhood. The slaves themselves were rarely seen.
Oh, that makes me sad.
Then on April 10th in 1834, a fire broke out at LaLaurie Mansion, rumored to have been started by a slave that was chained to the stove. It destroyed part of the house and exposed Madame LaLaurie's cruel deeds inside. 7 starved, tortured, and chained slaves were rescued from the upper building and carried out for medical treatment.
My goodness. Why would you be so cruel?
And even just those details, without any more than what I've already said, would be enough to cast her in a horrible light.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have a much different, you know, perspective of slavery now than then. But even then, there were laws against abusing your slaves, which is why she got them taken away. But there was more going on potentially. Again, some of these could be rumors, some things that didn't actually happen. But I'll tell you why people believe that there could be truth to it in just a moment after I read them. So prepare yourself for even darker.
Gosh.
Some stories claimed that the slaves had been experimented on. One woman that was rescued had broken bones reset at odd angles so that all of her limbs and movements were bent and uncomfortable. Another slave had a hole drilled into his head and a wooden spoon sticking out when he was rescued,
Oh my gosh. Okay, no.
supposedly to scramble the brains of
Oh
somebody who had
my
misbehaved.
gosh. It's almost like early lobotomy.
Yeah, that's kind of how I saw it too. But just like the punishment kind versus the I'm trying to help
How can
you.
you even survive that? I don't have like the mental like willpower to survive that kind of torture, let alone like physically.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. I mean, people throughout history have survived crazy, crazy things.
Oh
But this is
gosh.
why some people doubt that maybe these things were exaggerated. I'm even going to tell you some more that are just super hard to believe how people would survive these things or that they could have been in this state for more than a little bit of time. So a third had cuts so deep that they exposed muscle and bone, and the skin
Mm,
was pulled back and pinned in place to expose
mm,
them. A fourth
mm.
had intestines removed and encircling his waist, and still others were covered in honey and set with black ants.
I don't know. That seems like you couldn't go on. But I tell you what, I listened to a podcast called My Favorite Murder,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the murders they describe in there, the human will to live must be so strong because what people go through before they actually die is incredible.
The body can endure so much.
Yeah.
As the news broke of these slaves and how they had been treated, nearly 2,000 locals came to view the victims. They were appalled and expected the sheriff would arrest Delphine straight away. When he didn't, the crowd transformed into a mob and attacked the residents. Delphine managed to escape, but the interior of the house was stripped and dismantled until the walls of the mansion were hardly left standing.
Good. Good for them. Sometimes we have to take matters into our own hands.
So basically, this entire place was just destroyed in this one moment in time. The event made local headlines, then national news, as Madame LaLaurie was reviled as, quote, a demon in the shape of a woman.
Yeah, that could be true.
Even after she sold what remained of the house and people came in to renovate and make use of it and build up a new house in its place, human skeletons were found beneath it. And this is another quote, in all sorts of positions, barely covered with soil, shreds of fabric still adhering to their bones, some skulls having holes in them.
What?
So, part of potentially those stories that I told you in the state of experiments that the slaves were found in could have come from these skeletons having been found, which is a real fact because it was in the newspapers. They buried slaves that had passed away, that had been mistreated in the basement of the home and under the home.
Yeah, I think she definitely killed all her husbands also at this point.
I mean, some of them died from mysterious circumstances, but I didn't go too far into the reading of that
Right, that's what I'm
because,
saying.
yeah, it
How
does seem
could
strange.
how could someone like that even convince someone to marry them? I don't know.
I think on the outside, she seemed probably like a very astute and elegant sort of woman from the pictures I
Mm,
saw of her. I mean, everybody looks, even serial killers, mass murderers look kind of normal on the outside. And the scariest of them are the ones that seem charming, right?
that's true. Yeah, we'll have to post a picture of her because what does she look like? What celebrity?
Oh my gosh. Don't put me on the spot. I don't know.
I have to have a picture
Um,
of her in my
Well, she
head.
has dark hair and she's a more slender build, kind of more drawn, elongated oval face.
Okay.
The first person who came to mind was a more old timey Megan Fox or something, maybe, but I don't know.
Okay. I
Okay.
think I can see it. Okay.
Though every paper mentioned the deplorable conditions of the mistreated slaves, most of the gruesome details and the supposed experiments came from one paper in particular called the New Orleans Bee, who had gotten their insider information from Monsieur Montreuil. I'm probably saying that horribly wrong. Yes, I know my French is excellent. He was a next door neighbor that had previously been in love with and then spurned by Delphine. So some
Okay.
people think the details that he gave about experiments and other things were a smear campaign against her because of what she did in spurning his love.
Wow.
Even the earlier rumor about the slave girl Leah, who had fallen to her death, some say could be incorrect. The truth being that a little girl had died there, that she had been sliding down a banister in play when she had fallen and hit her head on the marble floor.
Okay.
So, different sides to the same story. Interesting, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult to say for that reason how much of the stories are factual, given that reports, even from
Mm-hmm.
that time period, from that very year, vary so much.
Can you remind me what year it is again?
1834.
Okay.
We do know that since Delphine, no one has lived at the restored residence, the new building, for more than 5 years since she lived there. The only exception to this is a man who purchased the property just recently in 2013 and then sold it only last year.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, maybe 2 years ago now, because it's now 2025. So technically, he owned the property for 10, but he never lived in it because he lived in Texas.
So is this like the house you said was basically dismantled? Is it a new house in its place or was it
The old one
renovated
was
or
restored. Yeah, because it
okay.
wasn't destroyed completely. So what was left of
Uh-huh.
it, they rebuilt and built back up to what it was.
Okay.
And they built it that I think it was 3 years later, but it was completely restored. So it was
Okay.
still that same time period. Everything would be authentic to that time period since then.
Got it.
I thought this was a little interesting too. Even the actor Nicolas Cage once owned the property. He owned it in 2009, but then lost it due to his career tanking and bankruptcy.
What? First of all, why would Nicolas Cage buy the property? Is it beautiful or something?
Yeah, I described it to you at the beginning. You
Well,
didn't think
right,
that
but I just
sounded beautiful?
no, it did, but I'm just imagining it back then. And not like current day.
He's an
Like
eccentric sort of guy.
he sure is, but I also didn't know that Nicolas Cage's career tanked. He's still in stuff, isn't he? Or no?
What have you seen him in lately?
I don't know. I think of him in all of the I guess 2000s shows, but like National Treasure and
Yeah, that's all
Face
2000, like
Off
probably
and
before this happened. All those were before like 2009,
Family
2010.
Guy and
I mean, he definitely had a career, and I don't think his career is necessarily done, but he had a horrible run, at least, of bad luck where his career fell off from those movies that you're saying he did. And suddenly he had no roles and he had to file bankruptcy. And all this horrible stuff that happened to him, he claimed was because the house was cursed, because he had just bought the property when all of it started.
what? Wow. That's crazy because he was a huge actor of our time. And
Mm-hmm.
you're right that he hasn't been in anything lately. It's just strange that an actor's career would be at such a top level and you get star in all of these roles and all of a sudden nobody wants you. Doesn't that seem like a huge tank off? Like it should
Mm-hmm.
trickle or something.
Yeah, and there was no big news story that broke where he did something horrible to make him unliked or something, right? So
Right.
it's just random. We don't suddenly hate Nicolas Cage and don't want to see him in movies anymore.
Right. That's so strange.
So you may
Okay.
think, that's just coincidental, but he's not the only one who hasn't stayed at the property for longer than a few years. And the property has been used for quite a number of things throughout time, including as an apartment complex for a few years. And during that time period, there was a gruesome murder which took place, and that was in 1894. A tenant was found in a bloody mess, his belongings ransacked as if he was to be robbed. Yet nothing of value was reported missing. And when police interviewed neighbors, one of them said he was having trouble with sprites in the house and a demon who was determined to kill him.
Oh my goodness. Yikes.
So sprites being like trickster
Little
entities.
fairies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Playing little tricks on you, like moving things and tugging your clothes and stuff. And then a
Right.
demon who was out to kill him. And he did, in
Oh,
fact, die there. So maybe that has a bit of truth to it.
yeah. Maybe she's an actual demon. She came back in her next life as an actual demon. 'Cause she was so horrible in life.
Maybe. So
Oh,
perhaps the curse stems from the history of, the cruel torture of slaves or just slavery in general and the slaves that died there, or from her herself, or even from this murder, which happened still in 1894. It could be all of those things potentially haunting this place now. Many
mm,
people who've had the chance to go inside have reported moaning sounds, the echoing of phantom footsteps, the laughter of a little girl, and even the dragging of chains. Wow. During the time when the building was an African American girls' school during the late 19th century, there were numerous reports filed of mysterious physical assaults that happened in the school. Young girls would approach their teachers midday, tears streaming down their cheeks, and their shirt sleeves rolled up to show that their forearms were scratched and bruised. When
what?
asked who did that to them, they all claimed something along the lines of that evil woman, somebody who could never be traced. They investigated these claims. They at one point thought that the girls were doing it to each other to get attention, but they could never find the source of what was happening to them, and the girls seemed to be getting along just fine.
Hmm.
Also, the little girls, when they were interviewed, knew nothing of the history of the building, so it's a little
That's
strange.
sad. Yeah.
And when you think about it, if the woman was Madame LaLaurie and she really had a thing against African American and slave, when she saw all these little African American girls essentially that would look like little slave girls running around, possibly misbehaving, maybe she was trying to punish them how she would have done.
Yeah. Was anything reported about her own children? Because I think you said she had
So only
several.
two of the children lived in the LaLaurie Mansion with her in the time that she was when she married that third man. And they had escaped kind of the whole thing with her and were taken somewhere else. And nothing was ever mentioned about them other than they they didn't get hurt in any of it.
Okay.
Even outside the building, which hasn't been open to the public for years, by the way, the building itself, even outside where tour guides are often walking around, they have seen figures in the windows, felt tugs on their clothing, and even had the streetlights flicker or go out completely when telling stories of the past. LaLaurie Mansion was sold again last year, but I couldn't find information on the new owner. Perhaps it will once again be open to the public for those who dare to step foot inside.
No, thank you.
I have one other account to share that came from a source that supposedly worked at the LaLaurie house for a little bit of time during the 2010s. So after Nicolas Cage. Everything I read is her account. A few years ago, I was going through a rough patch financially. I was looking for just about any job that would pay decent and had flexible hours. I used to work as a housekeeper and quite honestly was something I was hoping would come up as a job opportunity. At the time, I was living in Vacherie, Louisiana, which was kind of far from all the major hustle and bustle that Louisiana had to offer. Lucky for me, a friend of mine told me about a small housekeeping job her boss had mentioned. They were looking for someone to come in 2 times a week to clean the first and second floors of this house that was located downtown. To fast forward things a bit, I ended up going down to the place. Huge, beautiful French home, literally in the heart of NOLA, and got the job. The first day was vanilla, nothing but work. I did what I was there to do, and as I got ready to leave, I got a whiff of this horrible stench, almost like burnt, rotten meat. I thought to myself, and I'm not going to read the swear word, S word, did I forget to take out the trash? So I ran to the kitchen and the smell faded. I kept checking but couldn't find a source of the smell. After double checking everything I left, when I came back the day after, I was in the second floor, dusting the parlor area, when I heard chains being dragged on the floor. At first, it startled me, and I just brushed it off as someone outside, but then I heard it again and again. It definitely was coming from inside the house. So I ran as fast as I could downstairs to tell the other housekeeper that somebody else could possibly be inside. It was only the two of us there that day. She just looked at me and told me to mind my own business, and then she kept working. That it was nothing. She was a kind of mean old lady. But I shrugged it off and went back upstairs. Again, out of nowhere, that putrid stench of burnt rotten meat filled the air. It was very annoying because just like that, it randomly came and went. Some days you'd smell it downstairs, others upstairs. Later on that day, while I was using the restroom, I heard this huge commotion upstairs on the third floor. What sounded like a young girl screaming and a woman chasing after her. I was literally like, WTF? I opened the door and
WTF?
I opened the door and heard running upstairs, and then it stopped. The yelling, the screaming, everything. I went back downstairs, and at this point, I was frustrated and told the other housekeeper what I had just heard. She looked at me and said, "You didn't hear anything, okay? It's best to just go on as if you don't notice." This was how she assured me there was nobody, that we were fine. Needless to say, I worked at the house a whole month because that's how long I could take. I had heard the repetition of the same yelling, screaming, and chasing. Other days, I'd hear chains dragging and dropping. But the thing that did it for me was that when I was taking my lunch break on the second floor and heard a sudden cry of agony, followed by the sound of chains that seemed to be coming from the third floor. I panicked, thinking someone was hurt and needed help. So as I was getting up to go get help, I saw a tall, dark man with chains wrapped around his neck, and just like that, I ran out of the house as quickly as possible. I never told the person that hired me that I had no intentions of returning. I just stopped showing up. As rude as that seems, I could care less. I just wanted nothing to do with that place. Anyway, it wasn't until 4 years later, when I had long moved away from Louisiana, that I returned to New Orleans with my boyfriend on vacation. We decided to do one of their spooky history tours, and I tell you, when I see that familiar building, my heart sank.
So she didn't know anything until after.
That's what the account says.
That's what I'm telling you.
You can take it or leave it, as people can write anything they want and share it on the internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of little details in that I was thinking, if somebody was trying to write a spooky story and just make it a spooky story, it wouldn't come across this way. There's just a lot of miscellaneous details that don't seem
Yeah,
relevant and are kind of out there. And I mean, it
right,
makes sense that it would need housekeepers.
right. Whew. That's
So,
all the things she experienced, basically, that had been experienced before.
mhm.
Ugh.
So with that, Autumn, what is your boo scale rating for the LaLaurie Mansion?
I think it might be a 4 because I don't feel like I would feel safe staying the night there. What would you give it?
I think I would give it a 3 for a similar reason, but more so because that level of intensity and sadness, we were talking about how those intense feelings can also be recorded sort of residually.
Right. I don't know if it's just residual though. Maybe the smell and the chains, but the scratches and the harm that was done to people afterwards, I don't think so.
The schoolgirl part, I think, is the most dangerous aspect of the story that would
Yeah,
make it a higher haunt rating, a higher boo scale rating.
right, because that's interactive and it's violent.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And those reports are actual police reports. They can't really be
mhm,
fake. So something was going on.
yeah, that's scary.
I think I would stay there overnight, but I don't think it's somewhere where I would want to.
You would stay there overnight?
Hmm.
I would not. Wow. Well, good job for reporting on something so dark. Now I
Now
get to do the
something
same thing.
dark as well.
Okay, so everyone take a breather, refill your hot cocoa, get a cookie, go to the
Grab your
bathroom
closest
because we're
puppy.
about to dive into more darkness. Okay, I am going to tell you the haunting of Lee Chapel Road and Lee Chapel Cemetery. This is a
Oh, that sounds familiar.
Oh, yeah, I know, because this is a small, unknown story of a road that is just blocks from my own home. Dun, dun, dun. So it's legit a hometown haunting.
I kind of want to ask already if you went there while you were researching.
I did go there.
Okay, I'm excited. Go.
I will tell you that at the end, so you have to listen to my whole story first. Okay, it was the morning of August 6th, 1918, in the last few months of World War One. 14-year-old Eva Roy was getting dressed for the day. She was the town belle in a small Virginia town known then as Burke Station, now known as simply Burke. Eva, a beloved figure in town, was known for her kindness and beauty. She even taught Sunday school at Lee Chapel Church. She was loved by many, including her father, Peter, and her sister and brother-in-law who lived with her in a small farmhouse. The community was small and rural, dependent on farming for its livelihood, and the neighbors were miles from one another. The family had moved to Virginia from Minnesota just 6 years earlier, and Peter had purchased two parcels of land totaling 180 acres. Can you imagine? Think of my neighborhood and think about owning 180 acres. Isn't
Yeah.
that weird? Peter, since then, had become a prosperous farmer and an active member of Lee Chapel Methodist Church. On this particular morning in August, Ava's father had a business in town, and on his way out the door, he remembered that his cows were roaming around. It was well known that Peter let his cows roam in the evening. In his haste, he asked Ava to fetch the cows for him and bring them back home. So around 9 a.m., Ava left her home to tend to her family's small herd of cows with a bottle of coffee, because back then 14-year-olds drank coffee, and a sack lunch. When Peter returned, he realized Ava had not come back home. He immediately went out to look for her, finding the cows, but not Ava. He gathered a search party. All the lumber camps, which was the primary trade in Burke at the time, ceased, and all the workers joined the hunt for Ava, searching the woods that laid behind their farmhouse where Ava would have searched for her missing cows. Tragically, the next morning, her body was found near an empty house known as the Haynes house, and a small stream. She was found by neighbor Paul Marshall. Now, if you're driving with littles or near children, you can turn down the volume a little bit for about the next 20 seconds because I'm about to get a little too real life.
Oh no.
When they found Ava, she was in a sitting position with her neck tied to a tree by her own apron strings. A bloody trail from an open field to the wooded area showed where she had been brutally attacked and then dragged about 200 feet to her resting place. Around her body were torn strips of clothing, paper from her sack lunch, broken tree branches, and shoe prints. Ava was covered in scratches and cuts, and she had been brutally raped. Before a proper investigation could take place, well-meaning neighbors moved Ava's body, destroyed her bloody clothing, cut the string from around her neck, and washed her and returned her to her home, which, of course, resulted in the loss of a lot of crucial evidence.
Man, that's
When
so terrible. I mean, you get why they do it though, especially with littles. Like you don't want them to stay in that state even if they've
Mhm.
passed on. Imagine coming across that and even if you're just a neighbor or something, it's just instinct, right? You're just trying to help even if you can't help anymore.
Right, exactly. You're just like, oh, I have to do something, this poor girl. I don't want her family to see her like this, even today, let alone back
Right.
then when evidence wasn't a well-known theory.
Mm-hmm.
When the county coroner finally arrived after Ava had been moved home and cleaned, he concluded that the girl had been brutally assaulted. Great conclusion. Everyone knew that already. And then she was strangled to death. The sheriff, meanwhile, called in the bloodhounds. They sniffed around the crime scene and then they immediately took up the scent and headed towards Camp Humphreys, about 10 miles away, which was a lumber yard. On the outskirts of the camp, amid a crowd of laborers, the hounds went directly up to Lou Hall and pounced on him. The man was arrested immediately and taken to jail. However, the case was not to be easily solved, as other suspects were soon identified and eventually eliminated. But I'm going to give you a little synopsis of each of the suspects here
Mm-hmm.
so you can decide for yourself. It's like a little whodunit mystery. I know we all love mysteries. So, the first suspect, William Wooster, age 16, was soon after arrested for assaulting a quote, colored girl. He had recently been released from an insane asylum, but it was found that he was nowhere near the scene of Ava's murder. The next suspect to emerge was a soldier who deserted from Camp Humphreys, which is now Fort Belvoir. The soldier, whom the papers failed to name, was located days later near Charlottesville. He had scratches all over his face and hands and was wearing freshly laundered clothes. He claimed to have no memory of the events between when he left Camp Humphreys and when he was captured. He was interviewed, but after weeks of investigation, it was determined that he was not the murderer. Next, Ben Rubin, an escaped inmate from Lorton Prison just south of the murder location, had been serving a 3-year sentence for housebreaking. He was arrested by Washington, D.C. police a month after the murder for assaulting another little girl. While on the way to the police station, he confessed to Eva's murder. Rubin claimed he met Eva Roy looking after her father's cows. He asked her for food, and in a conversation with her, he told her he was an ex-convict. She declared she would turn him up, and he became excited and choked her to death. Authorities were unconvinced by the story, mostly because it had been in paper after paper after paper for months afterward, so he would know all those details. So they were unconvinced, so they ultimately took him to the crime scene, and he was unable to locate the tree or general area where Ava had been left. Rubin's motive for confessing was revealed some weeks later when on October 6th he escaped from the jail in Fairfax. He was arrested 2 days later while attempting to buy a pistol and admitted that he concocted his story in order to be transferred to Fairfax, where he thought escape would be easier. Finally, we have Lou Hall. Lou Hall was finally tried for the murder in Fairfax County Court. Lou Hall lived with his wife and 2 children about 1 mile away from the Roy farm. He was 33 years old at the time of the event and had a reputation for being, quote, unsavory. He was often irritated at Peter Roy for letting his cows roam near his property, and he was known to beat his wife. According to Hall, he was at home when the murder took place. According to Peter Roy, however, he went around knocking on all the neighbor doors when he returned home around 2 p.m. that afternoon in hopes of increasing the search party, and no one was at the Hall residence at the time he knocked. According to Mrs. Hall, Naomi Hall, Lou Hall's wife, her husband had ordered her to leave that morning to take the children to her father, who lived about 3 miles away. She considered this unusual because for years Hall had forbidden her to communicate with her father at all. Lou, however, explained that he told her she could go because he had finally found work as a woodcutter at Camp Humphreys. Miss Hall also reported that her husband returned home around lunch that day, and he was greatly excited and all wet, like he had fallen into a pond. So I read this confession, and I was just kind of like, I feel as if the wife would say this because she wanted him to go to prison.
Mm.
I don't know why a wife would be so openly honest. Like, oh, it was unusual that he sent me from the house and he was all excited, like something would have maybe happened while I was gone, you know?
Well, you don't know how the information came out exactly. Like it might not have just been her being like, here's all this information for you. It might have been that she was asked very specific questions. When did he return home? Is there anything different about the state of his attire or anything, you know?
Yeah, it
And
could have
then
been.
she gave those answers and it led to this confession, this story, as you say. But
It could
the
have been.
even the bloodhounds alone, that's pretty damning evidence if you ask me. I trust the puppy dogs.
Yeah, well, so we're going to get to that. But in addition, false evidence was placed under Lou Hall's mattress in the form of look-alike apron strings from the crime scene, the ones that were tied around Ava's neck, but they weren't her apron strings, it was determined. So
Hmm.
someone planted evidence there. Side note, maybe the wife did it, but like I meant not did it, but
Not killed
planted the
Ava. Yeah.
evidence. Lou Hall was also seen near the location of the assault around noon that day by an eyewitness. However, Lou Hall did claim to have gone that way on his way to work that morning, which could have also accounted for his scent near the scene as well. Through
Mm,
the
yeah,
you're like,
no,
I don't know.
I'm not convinced. I still think he's guilty that one.
Through the investigation and the trials, Hall retained his absolute innocence. Detectives used every trick in the book to get him to confess, even saying at one point that they had a witness to the actual murder that could identify him. Hall replied that if there was a witness, it wouldn't be him who they identified because he was not the murderer. Then they even put an accomplice in his cell at one point, who, after gaining Hall's confidence, jumped up in the middle of the night and claimed he saw the ghost of a young girl in the cell with them, acting that out to try to get him to confess. But Hall never reacted and simply said he didn't see a ghost. Apparently they had tried that because it had worked several times in the past.
That's a cool theory. Cops should still do that. Why don't we do that anymore?
I think maybe we're just not in the age of spiritualism, and
Hmm.
maybe belief in that spirit world isn't as well pronounced as it once was. I don't know. But they should just try it and see what happens. So, Hall's first trial resulted in a hung jury with 9 votes for guilty and 3 for innocent. His second trial resulted in a clear verdict of not guilty. In addition to all these suspects, the detective investigating the case, William Burns, was certain that none of these strangers could have committed the crime, and it must have been committed by someone familiar with Eva's routines. In a Times Herald newspaper article a week following the murder, it reads, Eva Roy's slayer was no chance stranger. The physical facts definitely fix the crime on one familiar with the girl's habits and with the forest in which she tended her father's herd of cows. The crime was premeditated. The slayer knew in advance that the old Haynes house, a short distance from the scene, was vacant. He had judged distance to the nearest houses where the screams of the girl could be heard. A stranger would have left the body where it had was done to death. The real slayer, carrying out a prearranged plan, removed it some distance from the scene and tied the dead girl's belt around her neck, made it fast to a tree. So no one ever was proven guilty. The case was marred by false confessions, planted evidence, and questionable tactics by the police, leaving the crime unsolved. Her father was so frustrated by the lack of progress in the case that he hired his own investigator, who actually then exhumed Eva Roy on August 17th. Her body was taken inside Lee Chapel to be examined, but by this time, decomposition was too far to see any cuts or bruises or gain anything useful for the investigation. Ava's father died January 22nd, 1938, about 20 years later, and was interred in Lee Chapel Cemetery next to his youngest daughter, never finding peace on who killed her. To this day, Ava's murder remains the biggest and most violent cold case in Burke, Virginia.
Yeah,
Yikes.
wow. So I have a couple questions that maybe you have answer to, maybe you don't.
Yeah, go for it.
The soldier they determined wasn't it after you said various interviews. How did they determine that? What was the factor that they used to say no, it wasn't him?
I didn't see that in the newspaper articles. There was a couple more suspects even than this in the case. And when they determined that it was not them, it was kind of circumstantial, like that they had witnesses that saw them somewhere else at the time of the crime, or that they couldn't have done it because they didn't know certain things about the case, like the guy who confessed, but then he didn't really know anything
Mm-hmm.
about the murder. The soldier in particular, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think it's
So
probably
something
in my
within the
book.
interviews indicated maybe he didn't have the right knowledge.
Yeah. I think that they determined part of this was that Ava couldn't have scratched anyone because her nails had been so bitten down to the quick. And so the scratches on his face and hands wouldn't have been from her, which was like the biggest circumstantial evidence.
Hmm.
And the only other thing was that he deserted camp. So they really had nothing to go on. They only knew
On
that there was
him.
a
Yeah.
soldier that deserted, and when he was found, he had scratches on him.
Which could have been from trees or other things.
Right. And then because he couldn't say where he was during the time of the assault, like he had no memory of it, was like, well, if you have no memory of it. But I feel like a guilty person would have come up with something.
They would
Not
just
been
make
like, oh, I
something
don't
up.
remember. Right. But if he deserted from the military,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he was probably in a pretty bad depressed state, which I guess could have made him do it, but I also think that's why he probably couldn't remember what he did between then and being captured because,
Or he could have been drinking
right, something
potentially.
was probably going on in his own life.
And then you said the 16-year-old that was escaped from a insane asylum.
Yeah, and he was mostly arrested because he had assaulted another girl, although be it not violently, and his arrest was basically because he also was colored.
Mm.
There was no real evidence on him.
So
I
he
mean,
wasn't like seen in the area or something additional.
correct.
Yeah, I don't know. My instinct still says the neighbor.
Yeah, I mean, there's the most on him, right? But of course, if you're on that jury and all the evidence around it is circumstantial, there's no clear cut evidence that you did it. So I understand why they didn't reach any kind of guilty verdict for
I don't
that.
know. What's the point of, say, using the dogs to track someone down if you're not going to take that as partial evidence? Like that is some level of yes, he was right here. They caught his
Mm-hmm.
scent. It meant
Right.
he was there. And then like trying to plot his route and seeing, oh, does that make sense for him to actually go right past this house that way? And if he
Right.
had gone that way, why didn't he see anything? Like why wasn't he a witness?
Right.
I don't know.
Okay, listen. I'm a big believer in dogs. So I, for one, would say if a dog said you did it, you probably did it, right? I'm just going to
I'm
believe the
glad we're
dog.
agreed on that.
Over any kind of human testimony, I'm going to believe the dog because dogs are always honest. But I think because he's a neighbor, he's in the area, he could have actually walked that way, that there was a shred of doubt in the juror's mind. Like his story could be plausible. And as a juror, you're supposed to say if there's any shred of doubt, you cannot convict, right? That's how our country's set
Hmm.
up, at least for now.
I don't know.
That was about a murder, but this is a ghost show. So onward. This story was the most gruesome event that had ever occurred in the county, and it left a deep scar on the small community. Local legends say that Ava's spirit has never left the woods where her life was taken. The trauma of her story has bound her to the land where she took her final breath. One of the most commonly reported encounters with Ava's ghost is hearing her voice in the woods near Lee Chapel Cemetery, where she was buried. Witnesses describe a heart-wrenching cry. Others hear, "Help me, please," and still others have reported distinctly hearing, "I am Ava." These cries have led ghost hunters and unknowing locals into the woods to help, but as they get close to the origin of the sound, it fades into silence. Visitors to the cemetery and the surrounding woods often report sudden drops in temperature, floating orbs of light, and cold breezes, despite no wind in the area. Feeling of being watched and overwhelming sadness have been also reported. Then they are in a graveyard, so usually that
Mm.
does make a person sad. So the local listservs and Reddit have had many reports of unsuspecting motorists seeing a figure late at night while driving down Lee Chapel Road. The figure is usually dressed in white or blue and is often seen standing by the edge of the road or just within the tree line. Drivers report slowing down to help what seems to be a young girl in distress. She's often seen looking toward the old Haynes house or wandering toward the cemetery. In other instances, drivers claim that they've seen her running into the road. She's illuminated by their headlights before disappearing. This has caused more than a few near accidents, with drivers slamming on their brakes, only to find there is no one there. A few reports from drivers say that they pulled over to help the girl who claims to need help or says, "I am Ava, I am here." When the driver turns and reaches for their phone to get help and they look back, there is no sign of the girl. I'm going to read you a report two reports actually, that I found on a local listserv.
Mm-hmm.
This was reported in 2012. The night of the derecho, about 2 a.m., I was driving to go down Lee Chapel Road, but found the road blocked by trees. The lights were dark at the 123 intersection. I was using the crappy flashlight that was in my car to look under my car as a stick had been lodged in the undercarriage. Suddenly, a girl appeared at the edge of the woods wearing a flowy nightgown. As I tried to get a better look at her, she screamed, "I am Ava," and vanished before my eyes. I'm totally serious. This is a true story. Does anyone know anything related to what this could be? So the person that posted this had no idea of the story, or seemingly didn't. And then other people are replying on this chain
Mm-hmm.
about Ava's story, about what happened to her.
Interesting.
Um, okay, here's another one. The grammar on this story isn't as great, so I'm going to read it as it is.
What I really like about the last story is that I'm not even kidding. What is
It's a
this?
true
Like,
story. I'm total right. What is this? I'm
I'm
not even
totally not
kidding.
lying. Please tell me.
This one is posted by a cop.
Ooh, we love cop stories.
Yeah. I used to work as a county cop in the late 80s, early 90s, and we used to get quite a few service calls about that cemetery around this time of year. We often rolled up on kids smoking weed and drinking cheap beer in there. We would pour out the beer and stomp their weed into the ground and send them home most of the time. One night, we were looking for a kid that was known to hang out at the cemetery. I hiked in there with another cop while two other cops kept their distance sitting in their Crown Vics. We had info that the kid was camped out under a cameo tarp, but I think that's supposed to be camo.
Yeah.
Under a cameo tarp. I'm like, what is a cameo tarp? That sounds beautiful. Sure enough, we spot a tiny campfire in the rear of the cemetery. We got pretty close to him before he tried to run. I grabbed the kid by his ankles while my buddy peppered him. Just about the time we get the cuffs on this kid, a rush of wind that seemed to come out of nowhere takes our breath away. The wind was so strong that it blew the campfire embers out into the woods and set the dry leaves aflame, something terrible. As I grabbed for my radio to call our buddies to move in, I saw a young girl in a light blue robe walking through the fire. I called out to her in fear that she would get burned. She turned straight towards me and screamed, "God, please help me." Then she vanished in front of my eyes, like Scotty had beamed her straight up. I swear to God, this is a true story.
What's with these people in Virginia saying that? I swear,
I,
I promise it's true. I'm not
but
lying.
so he says he knows nothing also about Ava Roy, and people go on to talk about her in this chain. Like it could be Ava, she's known to be in this graveyard, and the cop replies, "What are you talking about? I don't know who this is."
I just think
Paranormal,
it's interesting also the things that they claim that she's saying. Like, I am Ava because you think people don't remember you, or why would you choose to scream that of all things, you know?
yeah, it could be because maybe you're hoping people are still searching for you. I'm just thinking if I'm 14 and I'm being brutally attacked, I'm thinking maybe someone soon will come and find me, you
Or
know?
maybe it is some kind of clue about who did it because maybe it is somebody that she knew and she felt like whoever it was wasn't recognizing her and she was trying to convince them like this is Ava, like you know me, don't hurt me.
Yeah, like almost a residual yelling at them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good thought. Paranormal investigators who have explored the area claim to have recorded EVPs of a young girl's voice matching the description of those who have heard her in the woods. So I did drive this road, albeit not at night, but I
What?
went.
Why not at night?
I should, I mean, I just drive that road at night on a normal basis. And since learning about the story, I do pay extra attention. I haven't seen anything, but I did go to the graveyard and I went during a cloudy day because you're not supposed to be in there at night. There's signs posted. But I think when you come, Laura, for a visit, we should sneak in there. At nighttime, I just didn't want to be arrested by myself, but we could be
Oh,
arrested
okay.
together and that would be
That's
fine.
fine. Yeah.
So it was a cloudy day, and I went to the graveyard mainly to find her grave. I wanted to try to find her grave and take pictures of it because that day I also went to her house, which is still standing and it's still someone's private home. And
Oh, interesting.
I thought like, I wonder if I paid for a hotel room for a night for them as like a staycation, if they'd let me
Mm-hmm.
stay in their house to do ghost
And
hunting.
investigate? Yeah, you should
Yeah,
ask.
right? Because I feel like Ava would go back there if she could.
You would think.
Anyway, so I took pictures of the house, which are going to be on our webpage of this episode. And I did a walkthrough of the cemetery. And while I was walking through, I did run my digital recorder and
Mm.
was trying to find the gravestone, which I found, but it's a small cemetery, but it took me a good while, probably 15 minutes to find her tombstone and to find her father's tombstone. And after researching this story and writing it and doing it, it was kind of just a very heartfelt, emotional moment for me to be right there
Mhm.
by her after such brutal things had happened to her. And I talked to her a little bit. And as I was walking through the graveyard, I'm talking to her about, I'm sorry that everything had happened to you. I'm telling a story about your life and about your death, and I won't let people forget about you. The cemetery is on a very busy road now, one of the main roads, Fairfax County Parkway of Fairfax County. So there's a lot of background noise. But
Mhm.
as I was listening to the recording, I heard a whisper and
Mm.
I like magnified the whisper and the whisper says she's probably by the church. And
What?
I freaked out when I heard it and my heart stopped. I was like, oh my gosh, I actually captured an EVP. That's the first one I've actually ever captured. I was so excited. And then I listened to it again and I realized it was myself whispering to myself.
That is such a great story. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I could, listeners, Boo Crew, put, if you're interested, the 15-minute recording on the website page so you could listen to it and let us know if you hear anything. Again, the road noise is very prominent in the audio, so it's really hard to hear anything underneath it. But if you hear anything that I wasn't able to hear or something that sounds funny to you, there's weird noises I feel like I hear underneath the road noise where I was kind of like, is that a whisper? I can't tell. So it'd be interesting, I think, to have other people listen to it and see. It was fun doing a little investigation of my own for one of our stories.
I'm still wondering if I shouldn't go up to the manor house up north, the Summerwind Manor.
Yes, I think you should. I mean, the cemetery could be our first stop on the way out of town on our road trip. It could
Yeah,
be
we
like
could. You
that
could show
night on the
me.
way out of town. I get a weird feeling every time I drive by Ava's house, and I don't
Hmm.
know anymore if it's because I know the story or not. I mean, I've even told Ainsley was in the back seat. We are driving to her preschool, and I said, Ainsley, do you see that little white house over there? And she looks and she says, yeah. And I say, guess what? And she says, Mom, are you going to tell me it's haunted? And I was like, oh, Ainsley, you know me so well.
She's like
So,
bored of
but
you. Instead of
yeah,
being a normal kid where she might be afraid or intrigued, she's like, Mom,
you can tell me
really?
something else is haunted. So, yeah, but it gives me the heebie-jeebies. It has this really old, spooky tree in front of it that's probably been there longer than the house has. And the tree looks like it's possessed with evilness.
Okay, I think that that's the house I'm remembering that no, I'm not even kidding you. I think that's the house
I would
because I
believe it
remember a weird looking tree outside and thinking that place is haunted for sure.
because of the tree. The tree, like, tells you right away there's some weird crap happening.
So you're telling me that's where she lived with her family?
Yeah.
Hmm, okay.
And I didn't see any reports of anyone investigating the dad or the brother-in-law at all,
Mm-hmm.
which today I feel like those are the two people they would have started with.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that they did it at all, but I'm just saying I hope someone 100 years ago looked at them. Anyway,
You have to ask me my boo skill rating.
oh yeah, what was your boo? What's your boo rating?
My boo rating, I would give it two ghosts. And I'm going to give it two ghosts. I was borderline three, but I'm going to give it two because there isn't a one specific building or something where that murder happened where you can pinpoint it and say, there's haunting for sure right here in this space. And that makes it a little bit more indeterminate because you can't say, oh, I'm going to go spend a night in the graveyard. I mean, you
Hmm.
could. Plus, I think that Ava herself, she was just a nice little girl. Like, it's
Hmm.
not, her spirit's not mean or anything. She sounds like she's trying to get help even now or a residual haunting. So, while it's a scary story, it's not a scary ghost.
Right. I agree with that. I think if her ghost is out there and existing, she would be one of those classic ghosts that's actually looking for help. And that
Mm-hmm.
maybe with the right investigator or the right person coming in contact with her might be able to help her and put her at peace.
So, you would also give it a two on the boo scale?
I think I would give it a 3 because given that it's right here down the street from my house, there is no location that I can expect her to be in.
Mhm.
Just imagining driving willy-nilly, to something in the middle of the night and then seeing a girl run across the street and slamming on my brakes, that to me would be horrifying.
You're like,
Right?
she's
She can
everywhere.
pop out at any time, which is the scariest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I suppose. It is kind of the stuff of a horror movie. The idea of this, you're driving along at night and all of a sudden you see this little girl standing in the middle of the road staring at your oncoming vehicle. Not that that
Right.
exact thing happened, but that's spooky. It is.
That was a dark episode, but hopefully we kept it light enough for everybody. We're hoping that our long season, spreading out the joy of hauntings, is helping you through winter. And our next episode in 2 weeks, we will be doing your choices, your recommendations from viewers like you, from
Your
listeners
hometown
like you.
hauntings.
If we didn't choose your haunting, we have it still on the list if you submitted it. If you have not submitted a haunting that you know of or that you would love us to share and share a story about, please comment on one of our Facebook posts or message us through our website so we can do your haunting next season. We would love to.
Yeah.
And I guess that's it.
So have a great one out there, everybody. Thank you for listening. And as always, happy
Happy
haunting.
haunting.